Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we'll examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. With a growing number of schools and districts becoming one-to-one technology environments, with the use of paper greatly reduced in schools, and assignments being given solely electronically, we ask the question, how much technology is too much? Additionally, ever since students were introduced to video games and they downloaded said games to their phones, parents, teachers, and caregivers have fought the constant battle of getting their students off their devices. In fact, many people, through their frustration, have adopted the attitude of, if you can't beat them, join them. With the advancements that we are experiencing with artificial intelligence, this may be a dangerous attitude to take where our children are concerned. To help us understand how we can make screen time more productive and useful for our students, especially when addressing topics like mental health, school readiness, critical thinking, and human and humane connections, today we welcome Sara DeWitt, Senior Vice President and General Manager for PBS Kids. Ms. DeWitt, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to carve out some time in your day to have this conversation with me, because I know, and I'm sure you are aware as well, that especially during the pandemic, it seems that the usage of technology and devices amongst our students has skyrocketed, and we're to the point almost where they become more reclusive than inclusive in involving other people. So I think this is a great time to have this conversation.
Yeah, it's true. During the pandemic, we saw so many school districts start issuing devices to kids, including kids that were really had not had devices before. So I think about, I work, for PBS Kids, focused on kids 2 to 8. And for probably the last decade, most of the kids in our audience primarily would use a tablet at home periodically. And suddenly, that fall of 2020, we had a whole class of first graders across the entire country who suddenly had laptops for the first time. So really, not only is it more devices, it's also slightly different technology than what kids had been used to before. So we've seen a lot of changes in the last few years. I'm
glad you raised that point. And I don't know if you can get into this particular answer for me, or maybe just from your experiences, but I think that is a market shift in how students have been introduced to technology, or at least devices as well, because as you pointed out, for the most part, really young students, I would say pretty much from birth to age 6, we're really using tablets where they can just kind of point and swipe and things like that. Now they're being introduced to, at a very young age, to laptops with keys and keyboards. And now they have to learn how to actually type and keyboarding skills that they're still learning dexterity. So they have these issues that are going on. So I don't know if in your experiences that has come up from the schools that you contract with.
Well, I mean, a lot of schools use PBS Kids content within their classrooms because it is so trusted, because they know that we are creating safe media. What we're recognizing as kids are accessing our content is that we have more and more kids coming to us through pbskids.org, the website. And we really have thought a lot about how to design for these kids, because that 5 and 6-year-olds don't have those fine motor skills for scrolling. They really need things to stay above the screen. I think for a lot of kids, those keyboarding skills just weren't there yet. So really, a lot of folks who focus on early childhood, certainly we did, thought about what are the best ways to make things really point and click, or things that it's easy to use arrow keys instead of needing to use the keyboard. But it's definitely a shift. And it also means that kids are navigating a little differently. They have access to more things through that laptop than they necessarily would have just, on a closed environment like a tablet.
So since we know that students are utilizing different devices at a more rapid rate than they have, or an increased rate than they have in the past, I don't know if you can necessarily answer this question, and maybe there is no answer to it, but how can parents get their children to just put their phones down? I mean, because we're at all these different places where we go out to eat, we go to restaurants, and we're trying to have family time, or even at home at dinner time, and all you see are everybody has a phone out at the table.
Yeah, because we work with, primarily we're focused on younger kids. We are thinking a lot about that conversation about how to set up good media habits early, things that will kind of stick with kids as they grow up. And one of the first things that, the advisors we work with recommend is really helping families set clear routines around media. So basically, as a family, determining that there is an appropriate time and appropriate situations for us to use media. And that's, for a preschooler, that's great because preschoolers love routine. So you want to really think about what is the best time of day for a kid to watch a show or to play some games on a tablet. And then what kinds of things are you going to put in place to help them know that that time is over. So now it's time to do one of those many other things that kids should do, like play outside or do good physical play or read books or play with blocks. So media is just one thing, one activity that you engage with, but you want to make sure there's like a mix of activities and set kind of clear parameters around that. Another thing that is really clear in the research is that when parents talk to kids about what they watch or what they play, the learning gains from that content are greater. And so if parents also think about that as a habit they want to set up early, that we as a family talk about media, we talk about what we watch. You can start that, again, as a preschooler, you can start that by saying, so what was on Daniel Tiger today? What happened? Can you tell me the story? And for a preschooler, that's great. It's reinforcing the lessons they may have learned from that show, but it's also a good literacy practice skill for them to be able to repeat that story. As kids grow older, you can start to ask, more complex questions like, whoa, what would you have done in that situation? And let the child kind of walk that through and think about, what would I have done? How would I have managed that? What would have been a better thing to do? And we know that this is also a way that media can help parents get into conversations about more complex or difficult topics with their kids. So I think about the show Arthur, that is set in kind of a third or fourth grade classroom, and they're dealing with really real world challenges that kids deal with in school. So if a parent at dinner time says, oh, what happened on Arthur today? It may be a conversation about the friends having an altercation or somebody, not being truthful to someone else. And then you and your child can talk that through. What would you have done in that situation? Has that ever happened to you before? The chances are that child is going to encounter a situation like that at school. And you've set up now a habit where you can talk about those kinds of tough things together, that the kid knows that the parent is a good sounding board for these kinds of conversations. So it's really thinking about like how media can, how you can create habits around media as a family that are going to make it a good jumping off point for other things, other kinds of activities you want to engage in as a family as well.
I think you raise a really good point there. Actually, two really good points that I want to address, and I'll take them separately, going with this last one first. And that's the fact that starting these conversations early, you allow the student to see, or the child to see, their parent as that sounding board, someone that they can go to when they have a problem themselves, because now they've already been trained on how to have these conversations. They've been trained on how to really express themselves in a way that ordinarily, because we know that teenagers, they keep things to themselves because they don't know how to bring up what they're feeling. They don't know how to discuss their feelings, whether it's to a parent or anyone else. But now if you start them early to start to explore those feelings, when they get older and they do start to experience them directly, now it's a little bit easier for them to go to that trusted adult, whether it's a parent or an aunt or someone else that they trust, to be able to express what's going on, and before we get into a bigger issue, whether it's mental health or otherwise.
Yes, I totally agree. It's setting up this habit of conversation. And I think, parents struggle a lot sometimes with those questions of like, oh, what did you do today? Kids don't necessarily always want to open up about themselves, but they might open up more about other characters or a story they really loved. And that's a great kind of entry point to a broader conversation, as you said, about more personal experiences and feelings. I think the other thing about this habit of talking to kids about media, that at some point kids are going to be watching things or experiencing media that maybe wouldn't be something you necessarily wanted them to see, or something that might even make them a little uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And you're setting up a habit where media is something we talk about. It can help kids with critical thinking skills or with media literacy, being able to talk about what they didn't like about something or what might have been a problem in something that they watched or saw. And so really opening up that idea that media is something to critique. It's something to break down together. It's something that you can have an opinion about. I think is a really good behavior to model as well.
You jumped the gun on me on that one, because that was the second point I was going to raise with what you had brought up as far as developing those critical thinking skills, because we know about this whole age of fake news and so forth. Now students can go into looking at these Twitter posts and other things they see on whether it's on Facebook or anywhere else online, and they can look at it from a more critical lens to see if this is factual information that I'm seeing, or if it's not factual, and they can look at it with that more critical lens, as opposed to just accepting everything they see as factual.
Exactly. We've been thinking a lot at PBS Kids and with some of our advisors about how things like media literacy can be worked into more of our stories. And starting early with kids, it's kind of about asking questions. If you think about preschoolers, where they're kind of dealing with fact and fiction is more about like rumors on the playground kind of thing. And so you can deal with those kinds of stories, trying to find out what the truth is. As kids get older, we do have some programs that model some really good media literacy practices. Like we have a show, Molly of Denali. And Molly in that show regularly is using all kinds of media forms to find information. So the series is set in Alaska. This is the first nationally distributed show starring an Alaska Native character. But she is using the internet. She's using text messages. She's using indexes in books and library materials, brochures to find information to help answer questions for people who are trying to find something in Alaska or follow a map. And some of that means, sometimes she comes across information that isn't right. And so how does she find the right source? How does she track down that most accurate information? It actually makes for some really interesting storytelling, and also helps the kids who are watching it come away with an understanding that just because it's written somewhere doesn't mean it's true. And you need to kind of dig in a little bit more to figure out what is the right information that you need and what's the best source of information.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is Sara DeWitt, Senior Vice President and General Manager for PBS Kids. Now, of course, you just raised a really good point as far as we have a lot of people, especially our high school and even some college students, that take everything on at face value, and they don't know necessarily how to challenge the information that they've seen, that they've been given. So I think by teaching students at an early age on how to experience this and what to do about it, how to go about looking at primary sources and other sources of material to really get to the nitty gritty of information to make sure it's correct is a good place to start. But before you delve into that and respond to that, I don't want you to be able to talk to us about what PBS Kids is for those couple of listeners who may not actually know. So talk to us about PBS Kids and the content that is offered to students and families around the country?
Sure. PBS is the public broadcasting service within the United States. And so we have been around for a long time as a nonprofit media organization that delivers educational content nationally, but through local communities. So we have local member stations throughout the country who not only are broadcasting our content, but are also taking a lot of the educational work from our shows into communities and working with families, kids, and teachers about how kids can learn from media. We focus on kids ages 2 to 8, and that is television shows, like 30-minute episodes, but also short-form content that you can find on our streaming media platforms, like the free PBS Kids video app and on YouTube. We also do podcasts for kids and digital games for kids as well. Things that are all focused on specific learning goals. And we work very closely with educational advisors and child development experts to help us make sure that the content we're creating is age appropriate for the audience, but is also really focused on the skills that are going to best help them get ready for school. So a lot of folks are familiar with PBS. People of my generation grew up watching Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Reading Rainbow. Most people know shows like Curious George through PBS, but they might not know necessarily that Curious George is based on an engineering curriculum, that he is a character who takes things apart and puts them back together again. It's all really focused on science. And I think that's part of the magic of what we do, is taking these really specific educational goals and delivering them to kids in an engaging educational way that is also just really a lot of fun.
You know, and I think that's actually the hallmark of education, where you want to really get into it, is that students should be able to learn without the feeling that they're learning. So in the case of, like you say, with Curious George, they're reading this really interesting book and they're following all the zany adventures that he goes through. And it's he took this apart, and he broke that, and all that kind of thing. But they don't realize right off the bat that, you know what, we're actually learning how to put things together. We're learning engineering concepts, and at some point it's going to click in. As a 4, 5, 6-year-old, they probably won't understand it right away. But when they become 10, 11, 12, that's when it starts to click in. And I think it's real important for us to understand that if we're going to really educate our children, we have to do it in a way that they don't realize they're being educated.
Right. Or in a way that makes them so excited about learning that they realize that learning is really fun. So I think about, we have a show, Wildcrats, that is focused on animals. And it's Chris and Martin Kratt, one of their brothers. One's a zoologist and one's a biologist. And the show is so fun. It gets into animal traits and animal characteristics in such a way that kids who already like animals suddenly realize there's so much more to learn about them. And we hear all the time about the facts that kids want to collect around animals because they see in the show those characteristics give those animals creature powers that allow them to run really fast or swim to really incredible depths. So I love it. One of my favorite things is when we hear from parents that kids watch the show and then really want to go to the zoo because they want to see these animals in real life. And I think that's one of the really great things that can happen with this kind of media too, that a child is so excited about it that they want to go take that learning into the real world. They want to leave the screen and go see where they can learn more.
You know, and I think that's where the learning really takes hold, when the students does say that they see something that they see on TV or on the internet and they want to learn more. So they want to have that extended learning experience. And whether now you actually expand it to the rest of the family. And that's where that education gap starts to become lessened, because now not only are you getting the whatever that snippet was in that 30 minutes that they saw, but now you're going out and you're exploring a lot more. So you're getting more vocabulary, you're getting more of an experience, you're getting more of these things that really contribute to the closing that achievement gap that we currently see with among students of different cultures.
Yes. And I love that you mentioned the family, because I think that's a really great point, that when kids get so engaged in it, they kind of draw their family into it too. it is reminding me of one of my favorite research studies that took place around some PBS Kids content. A few years ago, EDC, Educational Development Center, did some research on our math programming. And one of the findings, the findings were that kids did learn some math concepts, that there was a statistically significant gain in some math skills by watching some of our shows that were around math. But one of my favorite findings was that parents reported being more confident in engaging in their kids' math education as a result of having these shows on at home. Because parents going into the study had said they were really nervous about math, that they didn't feel like they understood it well enough to be able to help their kids. But after these shows were playing, shows like Peg Plus Cat and Odd Squad that are focused on math, the parents realized they did understand these concepts and they could have these conversations with their kids about math or engage in everyday math activities. And that was just a really exciting way that media kind of could amplify across the family.
You know, that's really an important point to raise there, because a lot of families, especially in our generation, I think we're contemporaries, feel that they have this math phobia. They feel that they don't really understand what the math that their children are going through. So they as much as they want to help them with their math every night, they feel that they can't because they don't think they understand it. But as you pointed out, by looking at some of these shows that are on PBS Kids and other networks, they see that, you know what, I do understand those concepts and it does help out. So maybe I can go and sit down next to my child and assist them with their math homework at night, as opposed to just having them fend for themselves.
Right, exactly.
So let me ask you this. Are there any, because with the whole thing, the big buzzword in technology today is ChatGPT and artificial intelligence and how that is corrupting our students and having them cheat on exams and all that kind of thing. But are there any resources, whether it's on PBS Kids or anywhere else within the environment, the online environment you have, that is designed to help parents and caregivers understand just what ChatGPT is and how they can have conversations, or at least start conversations with their children about how to use artificial intelligence responsibly?
You know, it's all happening so quickly. I don't know that there are great sources out there yet, but this is definitely something that I think the education community needs to be engaged in, is kind of thinking about what are the best ways to talk about this. And I think some of the things we know just about talking to kids about media and what we discussed earlier, talking about what's a reputable source, how do you find out if information is true, they still kind of, they're applicable to this situation too, as things are changing. I think one of the things that I keep thinking about is what we've learned about just the voice assistants that a lot of families have in their homes now, where you can ask Siri or Google or Alexa a question. And we've heard a lot about kids talking to these devices and not framing their question in a way where they get a satisfactory answer. And I keep thinking about how these technologies are really most useful when you can ask a question in a way that is going to get the best information to you. It makes me think about the scientific inquiry process and how you have all of these teachers across the country trying to help kids recognize how they can ask really good questions in order to get to the right hypothesis or the answers that they need. And this is a skill that, you know, as we're talking to advisors, we feel like it's going to be really important for kids moving forward. How do you ask a really good question?
Yeah, I think that's really important as well, because even when you are going onto Google and typing in your search, it's usually when you fine tune your question in such a way, or get it fine tuned so enough, that's when you get the specific information that you're really looking for. Because if you just type in a few keywords here and there, you're going to get millions of pages of information that most of it is going to be irrelevant to what you're looking for. But when you get to really fine tune the question that you're putting in there into the search bar, that's when you get the most relevant information to what you have. So there's less for you to even sift through. But so I think now going through with the voice recognition aspect of it is doing the same thing. You have to really fine tune your questioning in order to get the exact response that you're looking for.
Yes, exactly. We have a show that just started in February called Work It Out Wombats that is early computational thinking for kids. And so what that means is really the building blocks of computer science. How do you break down problems into discrete parts? How do you really pull things apart and make the most sense of them? And part of that, too, is really how do you set up an idea or a query in a way that is going to work the best when you're, approaching these kinds of systems. And I think this is a really important skill that we can begin to teach as early as preschool.
Now, we've been talking a lot about how to utilize the internet and technology in a way that's safer and more responsible and so forth. Does this mean that people access the PBS Kids content in a way other than going onto the internet?
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, we are made up of member stations throughout the country. And so a lot of families who don't have broadband, who don't have Wi-Fi at home, access us via broadcast. This is still a really important way of distributing our content. We also have a lot of our digital platforms are designed in such a way that kids can access us and download content when they have access to Wi-Fi. So when they're at school or at a community center, they can download games to the PBS Kids Games app and then play them offline from home or from away from a computer, away from a Wi-Fi connection. So because we wanted to make sure that our content was accessible as possible to as many kids as possible.
And where can our families and caregivers and everyone go to get more information if they want to not just access the content online, but if they want to be able to find out where on their cable stations they can find the access there?
So pbskids.org is where we have everything that I've talked about today. pbs.org can also help you find your member station and find where you can access the PBS Kids channel. You also can find your local station, usually in just any kind of TV guide. And that will tell you not only, what is the main station, but we have a kids 24/7 channel in most areas throughout the country through those local stations.
And if you had to leave our audience with one final thought about how to leverage responsible use of technology to support student development, what would that thought be?
I think I'll go back to talking about media. We talked about that a lot in this conversation, but I think that is one of the biggest takeaways. If you can be really thoughtful about choosing content that you think your kid will enjoy, will get them excited about learning, and then talk to them about that learning, about that show, those learning gains are going to be so strong. And I think that's a habit that's really easy to implement that is going to help make media much more impactful in kids' lives.
Well, we would definitely like to thank our guest today, Sara DeWitt, Senior Vice President and General Manager for PBS Kids, for coming on to our show today. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.